But there are things that we can do, and I introduced one bill yesterday called the SCOTUS Act. And the SCOTUS Act is creating a new way for cert to be granted, because this Supreme Court is obviously acting like a legislature.
Jamie Raskin just delivered the constitutional indictment that explains everything. 2 Supreme Court seats officially stolen by Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate. In 2016, McConnell blocked Merrick Garland for 422 days, saying the people should decide. 2 years later, when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died with less than 2 months before the election, McConnell abandoned his own rule and rammed through Amy Coney Barrett. The result, a 6-3 court where a majority of justices were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. A court so reliably aligned with one side that it invented an immunity doctrine for presidential conduct that no president had successfully claimed before in American history. This court has a legitimacy crisis. Watch this. If you want to support the channel and get exclusive videos, kindly hit the join button below.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I suppose that court packing, like justice itself, lies in the eye of the beholder. But there are many different kinds of court packing. Here's one. When Justice Scalia died in February of 2016, when Barack Obama was president, Senator Mitch McConnell announced 10.5 months before the presidential election that the Senate would not be considering any replacement. The Judiciary Committee would not have any hearing, there'd be no vote in committee, and there'd be no vote on the floor. When people asked why, that makes no sense to hold the Supreme Court seat open, to hold that vacancy open for nearly a year, he said it was too close to the next presidential election and the people should decide. Of course, the people had decided in electing Barack Obama to one of those genuine, bona fide 4-year terms in office, like every other president. Well, we've got a controlled experiment about what would happen, because that was held open. Merrick Garland was nominated by Barack Obama and was left twisting in the wind for nearly 11 months after the death of Justice Scalia. Then, Trump, when he got in, was able to nominate Neil Gorsuch to the seat in his first week in office, and that seat was open for 422 days. And Mitch McConnell bragged about it, calling it the most consequential decision of his entire public career. And of course, it cemented the rapid movement of the Supreme Court to the right to incarnate the MAGA agenda on the Supreme Court. Well, look, here's what happened when Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. Now, she died on September 18th, 2020. So close to the next election, which was less than 2 months away, that early voting had started in a lot of the states. So it wasn't even 2 months away. And then the Democrats asked Mitch McConnell, some reporters asked Mitch McConnell, well, of course, you're not going to have hearings or a vote or anything in the next few weeks, are you? And he laughed it off. He laughed off the suggestion that they would maintain the same rule that they had used to block Merrick Garland and President Obama from having a seat. And then they rammed through the nomination of Amy Coney Barrett within 2 months, consolidating the right-wing anti-choice, anti-environmental regulation, anti-labor, anti-voting rights, anti-democracy majority on the Supreme Court. Had the original McConnell rule been applied, or even a reasonable approach taken with just a few weeks before the election, that Supreme Court seat would have been filled by President Biden, not by Donald Trump. Biden won that election, by the way, by more than 7 million votes. If you're interested in what the people want, 306 to 232 in the Electoral College. I know some people came down to overthrow the election, attack our police officers in order to accomplish a political coup to deny that, but that's what happened. So, right there, we've got 2 seats officially stolen by Mitch McConnell and the Republican Senate, giving them a 6-3 mega court with a majority of the court now made up of nominees of presidents who lost the popular vote. Lost the popular vote. Roberts and Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, all nominated to the court by by presidents who lost the popular vote. Now, if you don't believe that this Supreme Court has has conceived and achieved a remarkable transformation in constitutional jurisprudence, ethics, and behavior on everything from abortion to voting rights to political corruption cases, then you don't have to believe me, or you don't have to believe your own eyes. Just listen to Donald Trump, who openly says it's really okay for them to be loyal to the person that appointed them to almost the highest position in the land, a justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. He berates and vilifies justices and judges up and down the federal system who disagree with him or who he feels have been insufficiently robotic in their loyalty to the MAGA agenda. It's true, he doesn't want a justice loyal to the people, as the good chairman of the subcommittee says, or the Constitution. He wants a Supreme Court loyal to him and whatever is going to advance his interests, his money, his family, his corporations. He's got a Supreme Court majority so robotically loyal that they will pluck a doctrine out of thin air, nothing to do with originalism, nothing to do with textualism, out of thin air to insulate the president from liability for felony crimes committed in office. We went for more than 2 centuries without any president ever claiming the right to commit crimes under his office and not to be prosecuted for it. But here we are today. The Supreme Court, we must acknowledge, has been a profoundly conservative, reactionary institution for the vast majority of our history. And what did the Supreme Court ever do for enslaved people between the founding and the Civil War? Nothing, other than in 1857 in the Dred Scott decision, cement their subjugation into place, saying that the African slave and his descendants have no rights a white man is bound to respect in any way. And then even after the Civil War, after the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, drawn from the blood, sweat, and tears of the Union and the people who fought to defend our country against the Confederacy, the Supreme Court gutted the meaning of the Reconstruction Amendments in the civil rights cases. And then in 1896, in Plessy versus Ferguson, constitutionalized the reign of Jim Crow, separate but equal. So we have a couple decades around the Warren Court, maybe the first few years of the Burger Court, where the Supreme Court acted on the side of the people. Brown versus Board of Education, striking down American apartheid, the white primary line of cases, Terry versus Ohio, Roe versus Wade. But it didn't last long before it all sank away with the Rehnquist Court and the Roberts Court, and now they've returned to the historic baseline of political white supremacy. They wiped out our Voting Rights Act, first in Shelby County versus Holder in 2013, and a couple months ago in the Calais decision. And we are about to see, they're not going to be able to accomplish it all in 2026, but by 2028, we will probably see all white congressional delegations from the Deep South, wherever the Republicans control the state legislatures. Okay, that is court packing. That's political packing by a packed Supreme Court. The court today has a legitimacy crisis, not just because of the way it's been composed and stacked and packed and gerrymandered and divided by Mitch McConnell, who laughs about it. He thinks it's funny what they did. Why do some people want 13 circuits, Mr. Chairman? 13 members of the court? You don't need a conspiracy theory for that. There are 13 federal circuits in America. And traditionally, the Supreme Court has been made up of the number of justices equal to the number of circuits. And we got 13 circuits, but we only have 9 justices. So that means that under the best of circumstances, 4 entire federal regions, 4 federal circuits will be left out completely. And it's much worse than that today because we've got 5 justices from New York City alone, 1 for each borough. But you're telling a majority of the people who live in a majority of the states that they can't find anybody qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. So that's the answer to that particular question. But we've got a complete structural, ethical, jurisprudential crisis in the Supreme Court, whose name is in the gutter because of these terrible decisions that they keep issuing, like the overthrow of Roe versus Wade, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, the complete construction out of thin air of immunity of presidents to commit felony crimes while in office, and so on. And I hope that this court will do its best to try to behave like a Supreme Court, but there are things that we can do, and I introduced one bill yesterday called the SCOTUS Act. And the SCOTUS Act is creating a new way for cert to be granted, because this Supreme Court is obviously acting like a legislature. I mean, they set up an agenda where they want this case about the Voting Rights Act, they want to destroy it. Oh, now it's time for us to overthrow abortion rights, we're going to take that case. All right, a lot of countries don't leave the agenda-setting authority to the court itself, and certainly we should not leave it in the hands of this Supreme Court. It belongs with the 13 federal circuits. We should have a panel made up of the chief judge of each federal circuit or their designee, if they want another judge to do it, and they should decide when there is a meaningful circuit split or a federal question that should go up to the Supreme Court. This court obviously cannot be trusted with that agenda-setting authority. Let's begin to create a real Supreme Court in the country by moving in this direction. And I thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back to you.
Let's be absolutely clear about what Jamie Raskin just articulated. The administration's ability to operate with impunity, from alleged war crimes to corruption to an attempted coup, flows directly from a Supreme Court that critics argue has been stolen, packed, and now operates without legitimate authority. This is presented as the institutional root cause of the corruption documented in the previous 31 scripts. The timeline: Justice Antonin Scalia died on February 13, 2016. Barack Obama was president with 10.5 months remaining in his term. He nominated Merrick Garland. Mitch McConnell announced the Senate would not consider any replacement, no hearings, no committee vote, no floor vote. When asked why, McConnell said it was too close to the election, that the people should decide. Critics note the people had already decided. They'd elected Obama to a 4-year term like every other president. McConnell held the seat open for 422 days, then later called it the most consequential decision of his career. The next test came 4 years later. Ruth Bader Ginsburg died on September 18, 2020, less than 2 months before the election, with early voting already underway in many states. Raskin asked what McConnell would do: apply his own rule? McConnell brushed the question aside. Within weeks, the Republican Senate confirmed Amy Coney Barrett, producing a 6-3 conservative majority. Raskin and others have characterized this as court packing, not adding seats, but securing them through procedural maneuvering. The consequences in this telling are significant. A majority of the current justices, 5 of 9, were appointed by presidents who lost the popular vote. Roberts and Alito by Bush, who lost the popular vote to Gore. Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett by Trump, who lost the popular vote to Clinton and then to Biden. Raskin argues the resulting court has rolled back voting rights protections, overturned Roe versus Wade, and created a presidential immunity doctrine with no clear precedent in American history. In the recent immunity case, he describes the doctrine as invented out of thin air, with no real grounding in originalism or textualism. Trump, for his part, has said publicly that he wants justices loyal to him rather than to the Constitution, and has criticized justices he sees as insufficiently aligned with his agenda, which Raskin frames as evidence of a captured institution rather than an independent judiciary. Raskin places this in historical context. From the founding through the Civil War, the Supreme Court did nothing for enslaved people except cement their subjugation. After the Civil War and the Reconstruction Amendments, the court hollowed those protections out. Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896 constitutionalized Jim Crow. Only with the Warren Court, Brown versus Board, the voting rights cases, Roe versus Wade, did the court side more consistently with civil rights. But Raskin argues that era was an exception and that the Rehnquist and Roberts courts have returned the institution to what he calls its historical baseline. He points to the court gutting the Voting Rights Act in Shelby County versus Holder, and again in a more recent decision, as evidence of this trend, and predicts that by 2028, several Deep South states with Republican-controlled legislatures could send entirely white congressional delegations to Washington. Raskin's proposed fix is the SCOTUS Act, which would create a certification process where the chief judges of all 13 federal circuits, not the Supreme Court itself, determine which cases warrant Supreme Court review, removing agenda-setting power from the current court. He also raises the idea of expanding the court to 13 justices to match the number of federal circuits, noting that 5 of the current 9 justices have ties to New York City, which he characterizes as a representation problem. The broader argument is that this perceived legitimacy crisis is the institutional rot enabling everything else, and that fixing the court would address the conditions that allowed the rest to happen. You're watching Inside Politics. Hit that subscribe button and help us reach 100,000 subscribers and comment your thoughts.